Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博然。For over 2 decades, China has been executing the ultimate power play, a theatrical trolling extravaganza aimed squarely at Washington. Picture this: as the curtains rise, China unveils its annual report on human rights violations in the United States, setting the stage for an epic showdown of moral grandstanding. The latest act has just unfolded, and let me tell you, it's a performance worthy of a standing ovation. Did you know that nearly 60% of Asian Americans have to deal with racial discrimination? And get this, 43,000 people met their end last year due to gun violence. Oh, and here's a stinker. 54,000 American women lose their jobs every year because of pregnancy discrimination. Talk about a labor of love gone wrong. Today, we're diving headfirst into America's record of shame for 2023, and we're even throwing China into the mix for comparison. Did you know Chinese women get a whopping 98 days of paid maternity leave? Amazing. We'll also chat with geopolitical economist Ben Norton for his take. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Borham in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. Despite sitting atop an imaginary pedestal and looking down on the world with its holier-than-thou attitude towards human rights, ordinary Americans actually face incredibly tough challenges every single day. And it's all been highlighted in the latest report on human rights violations in the United States by China's State Council. The 30-page document features a litany of shocking facts and figures regarding Washington's hideous human rights record for 2023, and it's backed up with watertight research using mostly Western sources. You might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, doesn't Beijing claim to be non-interventionist? Isn't China all for leaving states to deal with their own domestic issues? Well, yes, but sometimes Washington's hypocrisy just needs to be brought to heel. And with so many accusations from America leveled against China's human rights record, why not grab a mirror and shed some light on US atrocities? Well, trust me when I say there is plenty here to knock Washington off its moral pedestal. So let's get started. After that, we'll have a chat with Ben Norton from Geopolitical Economy Report. So stick around until the end of the video. Now, this report on human rights violations in the United States in 2023 is chocker. So today I'll share just a few examples and we'll compare them to how China is doing in the same areas. First up, a statistic I mentioned earlier. 54,000 American women lose their jobs every single year due to discrimination over pregnancy. To be honest, I find that absolutely shocking. And I want to turn to China to highlight the treatment Chinese mothers receive. Now, China has a law called the Special Regulations on the Labor Protection of Female Employees, which offers pregnant women and women who have just given birth massive support. Article 5 says, employers shall not reduce the wages, dismiss or terminate labour or employment contracts of female employees due to pregnancy, childbirth or breastfeeding. Article 6 continues, if female employees are unable to adapt to their original workload during pregnancy, the employer shall reduce the workload or arrange other suitable tasks. Now, Article 7 is one that would make American mothers extremely envious. Female employees who give birth shall enjoy 98 days of paid maternity leave, of which 15 days may be taken before childbirth. But wait, it goes on. For difficult childbirth, an additional 15 days of maternity leave should be provided. Female employees who experience miscarriage within 4 months of pregnancy are entitled to 15 days of maternity leave, and those who miscarry after 4 months of pregnancy are entitled to 42 days of maternity leave. It's especially tough for women and children in the US, which has the hideous title of highest maternity mortality rate among all developed countries, far exceeding the country in second place. Child poverty is soaring in America, with 5 million kids falling into poverty in 2022 alone. On top of that, thousands of foster children go missing every year, with more than 20% thought to have been victims of trafficking. The US remains the only UN member state that has not ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Next up, civil and political rights, which the report states is an area that continued to deteriorate in the United States last year. The report notes, political infighting, government dysfunction, and governance failure in the United States has failed to protect civil and political rights, before adding that 76% of Americans feel their country is moving in the wrong direction. According to the Pew Research Center, US public trust in government has reached historical lows and stood at just 16% in 2023. 16%. A staggering 48% of young Americans aged 18 to 34 say that the US political system does more to prevent them from achieving the so-called American dream. And that means they're not even willing to vote. In the 2022 midterm elections, just 23% of young people turned out to vote. Another major area of concern in the US is gun violence, which last year killed an average of 117 people each and every day, and around 43,000 in the year. There were at least 654 mass shootings last year in the United States. Deaths from police brutality hit a record high in 2023. According to a service called Mapping Police Violence, police in the US killed at least 1,247 people last year. That's an average of 3 people every single day. Let's take a look at how guns are dealt with here in China. Basically, ordinary citizens are banned from buying or owning firearms and other deadly weapons. Article 125 of the Criminal Law of the People's Republic of China states that those who manufacture, trade, or store firearms, ammunitions, or explosives could face prison terms of between 3 and 10 years. And if the case is serious, for example, committing murder using a gun, the sentence could be 10 years to life or the death penalty. Ordinary police in China do not carry guns while carrying out their daily duties. That's good to know. The problem of religious intolerance deepened in the US last year, with 2,042 incidents of religion-based hate crimes and 5,156 complaints from Muslims alone in 2022. Let's take a look at mass incarceration and forced labor, both of which are rife in the United States. The report says, the United States is home to 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners, making it the country with the highest incarceration rate and the largest number of incarcerated individuals globally. Wow, that is an assault on freedom if ever I saw one, literally. Now, get this. You thought slavery was abolished in the US in 1865, right? Well, you'd be wrong. Slave labor is legal in the US as long as the slaves are prisoners. The report adds, incarcerated workers in the United States generate billions of dollars worth of goods and services annually. However, in most states, the hourly wages paid to prisoners amount to only 2 to 3% of the federal minimum wage standard, with some states providing no compensation at all. Absolutely shocking. This third chapter of China's report on human rights violations in the United States deals with growing economic and social inequality, touching on areas such as the gap between rich and poor, drug and substance abuse, and homelessness. According to the report, the gap between rich and poor in the United States has reached its worst level since the Great Depression of 1929. According to data released by the Statista on November 3, 2023, the poverty rate in the United States in 2022 was as high as 11.5%. In the third quarter of 2023, 66.6% of total wealth in the United States was owned by the top 10% of income earners. In contrast, the bottom 50% of earners own only 2.6% of total wealth. That is absolutely terrible, don't you think? Now, I don't need to remind you guys that absolute poverty was eliminated completely here in China in 2020, and more than 800 million people were lifted out of poverty across the country in the past few decades. Back to the US, though, where homelessness is at a 16-year high, with more than 650,000 people living rough on the streets. Even those with homes don't fare much better because 44.2 million Americans, including 13 million children, do not know where their next meal is coming from. Homelessness is also a problem here in China, but government officials are required by law to help anyone living on the streets find a new home, employment, or long-term care. I have to say, the report on human rights violations in the United States is a sobering read. You can check it out for yourself. The link is in the description below this video. Okay, now let's have a quick chat with Ben Norton from the Geopolitical Economy Report. Ben, it's awesome to have you on the show. A bit of a depressing look at the state of human rights in the US last year, according to China's annual report, but some will no doubt pay it no heed whatsoever, simply because it was authored here in China. In fact, as far as I can see, not a single Western media outlet covered the report. Is that just par for the course?
Of course. I mean, the corporate media in the US always ignores this. And we should keep in mind why China released this report. It wasn't just because China wanted to poke the bear and upset the US. It was actually reciprocal because the US State Department every single year publishes a human rights report, not only in China, but in many countries. It shows this very interventionist meddling that the US State Department always carries out, trying to lecture countries all around the world about their human rights record. So China, which always responds proportionately and reciprocally, China said, fine, if you're going to release these reports talking about alleged human rights abuses in China, we're going to detail the extreme human rights abuses that happen every single year in the United States, where 43,000 people died from gun violence in the US in 2023. More than 1,200 people were killed by police. That's an average of 3 every single day. And there's a whole long list of these human rights atrocities that are significantly worse than anything that they even accuse China of. So once again, we see this hypocrisy, and we know that the Western corporate media very frequently simply acts as a kind of stenographer for the State Department, really reflecting the foreign policy views of the Washington establishment. So it's no surprise that they ignored this report like they always do.
Yeah, you just brought up some of those hideous facts and figures from the report, including there were, I think, 650,000 people in the States last year experiencing homelessness. So, I mean, you've seen this all before. Was there anything that shocked you in the report, or was it pretty much as expected?
Well, nothing that shocked me because I've been reporting on these kinds of things for many years, but I think it's worth, highlighting some of them. Also, the fact that in 2023, there were 654 mass shootings in 1 year. That's incredible. And as I mentioned, 1,200 people killed by the police, an average of 3 per day. China's report also talked about the mass surveillance and the repression of protests in the US because, it's ironic. Washington constantly accuses China without any evidence of supposedly, just repressing its people and doing all these things. Meanwhile, we actually see constant repression of peaceful protesters in the United States. The report also detailed how freedom of speech and freedom of expression have been significantly violated in the US, especially as we see this horrific war on Gaza being supported by the US. People speaking out about the US involvement in these war crimes and atrocities have lost their jobs, have been imprisoned. And yet the US lectures China and other countries for supposedly violating freedom of speech. In fact, the US is one of the world's worst violators of freedom of speech. Another very important thing detailed in this report is mass incarceration. The US has around 4% of the world's population, and yet it has around 1/4, around 20 to 25% of all of the prisoners on Earth. And yet the US claims to be the representative of freedom and human rights. So, this report is definitely worth reading. If you don't know about some of the horrific US human rights record, some of the facts might surprise you because they really show that this idea that the US represents human rights and democracy is in fact the exact opposite of reality.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much to go through. I do recommend as well everyone have a look. It's only 30 pages long, and there were some other areas that were touched on, including the struggle of undocumented migrants. But for you, maybe just this year, what is the most pressing issue in terms of human rights in the United States?
Well, poverty, homelessness, the brutal inequality. So many people in the US are struggling just to make ends meet, just to pay their bills, to keep the lights on. It is absolutely incredible. You mentioned the epidemic of homelessness. I mean, this is so horrific. Anytime someone visits a major city in the US like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco or Chicago, you see the brutal poverty and inequality with thousands and thousands of people living in the streets, no bathrooms, no health care. I mean, massive drug addiction, because these are people who have nothing to live for. I mean, this shows what a society looks like when the government has completely abandoned its people. And meanwhile, you have the largest number of billionaires. You have billionaire oligarchs getting richer and richer, like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. They have hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth. And yet this government claims that it cares about its people. And yet every single year, thousands of people are killed by police. Every single year, tens of thousands of people die from gun violence. And every single year, hundreds of thousands of people live in the streets. And we're not just talking about, elderly people who have mental illness. That's often many people who are homelessness, but there are also many children and families and single mothers who are living on the streets because the government has completely abandoned them. I mean, now I've been living the past year in Beijing, and I have not seen a single homeless person. And I've traveled all across Beijing. I've been to other cities in China. I have not seen a single homeless person. And yet you visit the US, which again claims to be the richest country on earth, and you can see the brutal poverty and how little the government actually cares for poor people.
Yeah, it's definitely shocking. I think the US could learn a lot from China. Ben Norton from the Geopolitical Economy Report, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as always, I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think is the most hideous human rights violation uncovered in the report this year? Did you know that China has been writing this report for more than 20 years? And what do you think needs to change in the US? Do let me know down below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.